Okay, this is Mildred VanDyke speaking, and my parents were Charlie Gray. His name was Charles, but he didn't like it, so he changed it to Charlie. And my mother was Velma Stevenson, and her grandmother was a Fitzwater, so we're related to all the Fitzwaters around the country. I was born in Grover in 1923, and my dad was a traveling salesman for groceries. He had a vehicle that carried groceries, and he went door to door. And when I was born, he told people that he had a red-headed daughter. I've had people tell me that. And then my folks bought a country store in Wesley Roy when I was 2 years old. And so that's all I really remember, is growing up in the country store in Wesley Roy. And I attended 8 years of grade school in Leroy, and I loved it down there. It was a great place for kids to play outdoors, and we had good teachers. I had Gertrude Palmer in my first couple years, and then I had Elizabeth Jones, and then I had Ellen Baldwin. And every recess and noon we'd run outdoors and play volleyball over the grade school building, or play softball or whatever. And then our teacher took us hiking up the gorge that leads into Leroy from the north, and we also rode down a hill on our sleds one winter. We had a great time. And Ellen Baldwin, at Halloween, had a taffy pull at his home in Wesley Roy. I remember something that happened when I was a young kid in Wesley Roy. I stayed all night with a girlfriend, and my mother should have known better because they were dirty people, and I got lice, head lice from them. And when it was discovered, myself and my kid brother Don were the only ones that were infected, so I was the culprit. And my brother Willis and I, close of one age, rode down the hill and skied together in the winter. Then in the summertime, we rode bikes. We had one bicycle for the three of us, the oldest brother Waldo, and then Willis and I. We had to share that bike, but we did. And we rode bike and swam in the Towanda Creek in the summer, and that was a lot of fun. And one 4th of July, I remember my dad lit fireworks, and one landed on the wood shingles on the store and started a fire, but he soon got it out. Another thing that happened in relation to the store, the neighbors came with a pickup truck, and in the back end they had their big fat wives and their coon dogs. And the coon dogs had chains on them. And they drove up to Dad's gas pump, and in the process of getting gas, it was spilled on the ground, and the lantern that they were holding to see how full it was set the gas on fire, and everything was burning. Gas on the ground, and it was around the truck, and my dad grabbed the fire extinguisher in the store, tipped it up too soon, and sprayed everything in the store. Bedlam. The church building, plus the store section of our home, has been torn down. But we had a lot of good memories from that church, and in fact that's where Pat and I were married. Uncle Dan Grizzle lived down the road a little ways. He was a Civil War veteran. And I'd go down there every night after school, and he'd have a baked apple, and he'd pick out hickory nuts for me. I was kind of his girl. And I read his mail for him and enjoyed his Star Gazette funnies. There was a whole page of funnies. I played with Dorothy Mott. I would ride my bicycle down to Leroy 2 miles, or roller skate, and Margie Morse and Dorothy Mott and Irma Bellis were my girlfriends, and we used to stay all night with each other. And also Marjorie Morse and I had fun driving horses on the hay wagon, and it was real entertaining being around neighboring farms. I always enjoyed that. And then I went to high school after grade school in Leroy. I went to high school in Canton, scared to death for fear I'd get lost in that big building. I played girls basketball and loved every minute of it. And maybe you won't be able to believe this, but I was cheerleader, and I graduated a salutatorian. I started dating the best looking, nicest man in the valley when I was a sophomore, and Pat VanDyke, and we married in '41 down in West Roy Church and lived in the farm tenant house, now owned by Pat's nephew, Scott Shedden. The war began in Pearl Harbor in December '41, and we moved to Elmira so Pat could work in a war plant. And Leslie Shedden took over the farm, and he and Evelyn moved in the farmhouse. Wait a minute, I think maybe Davis did it first. Didn't he, Pat? Anyway, Davis and Leslie took over the farm after we left. And Trula was born in July '44 when we lived in Elmira. And there was a polio epidemic about that time, so we moved back to Pennsylvania with my parents down to West Roy. And we lived in Elmira twice. We lived in the Binghamton area, Colorado Springs, North Hollywood. Trula was in 2nd grade there, and we were glad to return to Pennsylvania. In fact, Pat was homesick all the while we were gone. And in East Canton, we lived in a double house with Pat's parents, and while we were building a home up on Minnequaw, near Davis VanDyke's orchard. And Ann was born while we were living in that new home on Minnequaw Heights. Pat helped Davis in the apple orchard. From there we sold our property and bought a new car and a house trailer, and away we went. We went west, and I have mentioned the places we lived. And Pat will tell you what he did in those different areas. Just to give you an idea how inflation has hit this area and every other place, we bought 80-acre farm with a large house and barn in East Canton, what was called the Watts property next door to the church, for $11,000. We sold it for $94,000 to Don Vaughn after we had sold 50 acres to Clayton Harkness up on the hill. And the Vaughns sold it to Eugene and Florence Anton for $127,500. and they sold it. Florence Anton sold it after her husband died for $278,000 to Tom Rowe. So that gives you a little idea how money values have changed. We have 8 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren and 2 more on order. And Maggie and Eric are expecting theirs the last of this month. It's January 2010. Bye-bye for now.